Hi, and welcome to another episode of Wine and Wisdom. I'm Thomas Le Hoang, and you're listening to the TL podcast, where knowledge is shared and no one takes themselves too seriously. All right, boys. What's this bottle here? What's this bottle here?
Oh, prepare to be amazed.
All right.
So I was starting to get a bit concerned because I've run out of venues to buy quality wine from because we've drunk our way through most of them. Well done, boys. Congratulations.
Yeah.
But stumbled into Dan Murphy's at Hornsby today in Westfield there. Never been there before. And the first sign that caught my eye was cellar release, and they've got a whole wall of specially cellared wines, which we're not privileged enough to have on the Central Coast, apparently.
Are you serious?
Gosford lift
Do you have
the
a
game.
dance? Do you have a dance?
Yeah. And they've got a whole wall of international stuff, but unless I haven't found it, which I highly doubt, the cellar release section. And the guy had to come and ask me if I was okay because I'd picked up 17 different bottles and put them back. I've spread COVID to everyone. But that's where all your the real aged wines were. And there's a lot of nice reds there, but it's been a bit warm, a bit muggy, and I'm sick of drinking reg, to be honest with you. So I thought we'll bring a Shardy, as I'm famous for. So it was funny because Thomas went Margaret River as well. So what I have is a Xanadu Reserve Chardonnay from Margaret River, dated 2011.
Two Chardonnays. This is going to be interesting.
10 years old, boys, which should be just about perfect, one would think.
There's a couple of bad
Right,
jokes
let's
there.
try it, man.
Let's do it.
So today we're discussing Churchill.
Yeah.
Who would ask you to put some poison into my
Oh, look at that colour.
my glass?
Oh, look at that.
Because I would want to drink it.
Look at that colour.
Okay, just by the color, I think he's one.
Well, mate, the first one wasn't a lot to live up to, I've got to tell you.
Cheers, boys.
Cheers. Oh, smell
Cheers, big
that.
dog. Here's some tea.
Oh, I'm interested. Let's go.
Oh, that's pretty good, man. That's pretty
Sound the bell. Game's over.
good.
Ding, ding.
All right, that's one that you need to share with some of the team members.
Yeah, how good is
That's,
that?
that's very good.
Well,
So we are talking today, which is someone that you pick, Winston Churchill.
I had to pick.
First of all, let me ask you, why did you pick him?
So, forever and a day, since I was a kid, I've been into war history. War history, I won't say buff, but it's always something that's interested me. For years, my thing as a kid was I was always going to join the army. So, I've always had a knowledge around the Great Wars and the people involved in them. And obviously, when you're talking World War II, especially, Winston Churchill's name pops up quite often. But what really brought it about in the last 2 years was actually COVID. I remember when COVID first happened and how badly everyone was handling it from a leadership standpoint. I mean that internationally, nationally, inside our own businesses, inside our own network. I started thinking, when was the last time the world faced something so drastic, and who were the leaders at the time, and what's happened to the leaders of men? Like back in the world wars, we had leaders of men, people that you could knight a country and convince 500,000 people to run out of a trench to get shot. So I started looking more into the leaders of around the war times, and obviously Winston Churchill was someone who featured prominently. Yeah. I chose him not because he's a hero or an inspiration, but he was a leader of men, and there's so much we could learn from that in everything we do in our life. He was fallible. He was very fallible. Yeah. He had a lot of issues, but he managed to galvanise a country that was about to be overrun by the Germans. Yeah. And he will live on in history because of that. But
I like it.
To give you an idea, before he was 25 years old, which was when he won his first seat in Parliament at 25, he didn't become Prime Minister until he was 65, but at 25 he got his first seat in Parliament. Before then, he'd already fought. He'd fought in 4 wars. Yeah. He'd published 5 books. He'd written 215 newspaper and magazine articles. He participated in the greatest cavalry charge of the last 50 years when he was part of the 21st Lanciers in the Battle of Omdurman, and he'd already been taken POW and escaped in the Boer War by the time he was 25. So the guy wasn't an average human, and by the time he did get into Parliament, he'd fought in more countries. The only person who fought in more continents than him was Napoleon.
There you go.
And he'd seen more campaigns than any sitting general any general in army history.
And he had very good military breeding, from what I understand. He went to, what is it, Sandhurst?
Yep, yeah, he went to Sandhurst Military College.
That's where most of the royals go as well. He did come from an aristocracy originally.
Yeah.
From a very wealthy family.
Yeah.
Apparently he's loosely related to Lady Diana through the Spencers.
Oh, wow.
Lineage. Yeah, anyway.
So he had all these accolades, and there's 57 different books about him, so you can find out all the good and find out all the bad. But I wanted to know 12 months ago how he managed to galvanise a country and keep them together when they were on the brink of defeat, you know.
I think it's interesting, like as you said, he's up until the age of 25, he had done so much and then went into Parliament. I think it's interesting to look at his life before he got into it as a Prime Minister. Through Gallipoli, he was actually in charge of the Navy. And
he overrode some of the Navy generals, and the Dardanelles was pretty much his fault.
Right.
Which he learned a lesson from and never questioned a military figure again in World War II.
And that's where I was coming from, was that he learned a lot of lessons leading up to becoming Prime Minister that served him well being Prime Minister. One of them was, and we'll probably talk more on it later, was being able to rally the ordinary people against an enemy. And he really got the English to understand that, you know what, these are the Germans, and they've been the bastards for a long time, right? The Nazis. I won't say the Germans, the Nazis. And he really understood the common man and how to rally them to his cause.
So I'll give you a timeline, and then we can delve deep into all the bits you find. So here's a guy. He was born 2 months premature. He was involved in 3 car crashes and 2 plane crashes. At 19, he jumped off a 30-foot bridge and was in a coma for days and then had mental incapacity for weeks. He nearly drowned with his brother in a lake. He had 4 serious bouts of pneumonia. He was stabbed as a schoolboy. He had multiple heart attacks. In World War I, he had no less than 30 trips out into no man's land in between the trenches to collect injured and dead. And he died at 91 years of age. Here's us trying to get fit and healthy and worrying about what might go on in life. But he's also a guy at 16 who is quoted as saying this at 16 years of age, all right? And then I'll hand over the floor to what you guys have found. So he said to his best friend at 16, I can see vast changes coming over in our peaceful world, great upheavals, terrible struggles, wars such as one cannot imagine. And I tell you, London will be in danger. London will be attacked, and I shall be very prominent in the defence of London. I see it into the future. This country will be subjected somehow to a tremendous invasion. By what means I do not know, but I tell you I shall be in command of the defences of London, and I shall save London and England from disaster. Dreams of the future are blurred, but the main objective is clear. I repeat, London will be in danger, and in the high position I shall occupy, it will fall to me to save the capital and save the empire.
Wow.
This was a guy from the day of birth believed he was destined to save the world. Now, coincidentally, the day he was asked to be Prime Minister was May 10, 1940, which was the day Hitler started blitzkrieg against the West.
Yeah, the blitzkrieg started.
So this is a guy who believed from birth that he was destined to save the world, and somehow, in some way, has ended up being a massive part of that history.
Yeah, wow.
So how'd you go, TL? What'd you find?
Listen, I did not want to have a look at history. I wanted to have a look at some of the defining moments about him. And one of the things is, as a young child, he was labeled as a failure. He didn't do well at school at all. And he used to get into all sorts of trouble. And to me, I think one of the defining moments he had was being put into boarding school and writing to his mother all the time about, Mom, I'm so unhappy, take me out of here. But she was too busy with her husband, with socializing, that they only actually visited him in boarding school once a year. And to me, it became somehow reading through some of his stuff that maybe that's where one of the defining moments where Sir Winston Churchill would develop depression very easily throughout his life. Every time he had some kind of failure, such as being fired of the government after the failures in Dardanelles, or whenever he'd lose even the prime ministership after he had helped Europe win the war, all of these moments, every single time he would just go into heavy depression, and that's when he would take on painting. He took on even building walls. He actually loved masonry, you know. And so what I learned from that is, as a parent, if you have children, it is important for you just to pay attention to how your children are feeling. Because some of the things that you may not do now may be convenient to you, may actually shape them the way that they are, in good and in bad. But what if we can just do that in good rather than in bad, right? So that was a defining moment. I think that the other defining moment for him was the fact that he adored his father. I can only imagine him putting the fact that he was put into a school he didn't like, with people he didn't like. Way before that, he was free to run around the house, break glasses if he wanted to, because he was a kid within a very rich family. And he wanted to be like his dad. And what he did was to study all his dad's speeches. He used to collect them and collated them. And what transpired from that is his ability to deliver great speeches.
Yes.
And I looked at some of his speeches, and the way I feel he does with his speeches, that he always starts with the negative. He brings you down in thinking there's doom coming up, and then he takes you back.
Yep.
It's a beautiful way of doing speeches, which is a little bit like Cicero back in the days of Julius Caesar, had the capacity to take the crowd, go with the crowd, and say, yeah, I agree with you, and then turn the crowd around. So they always had that same kind of thing. So I think it was a defining moment, because he had made the decision based on what his father was, and somehow his father being aloof from him brought him that when he totally rejected his mom, for the need to be as good, if not better, than his dad. And you know the level of in which he wanted to be like his dad, that he predicted his own death. He died the same day as his dad, 70 years apart.
Wow.
But he always thought he was going to die young, because his dad died at 42, so he was living and talking as if he was going to die at a young age.
And that may have spurred him on to do the things that he did, because he was like, let's live life to the fullest while I've got it, while I can. That may have inspired him to live that sort of
but he was a man of action, mate. Because when at 19, his father found out that he was no good at school. And his father really was an aspiring, was a great politician. And, mind you, he stuffed himself and got himself out of parliament and died pretty young. Maybe of depression too. But the big thing that his father did was to enroll him into the military school. And that's where he loved, and I think it was another defining moment. That's where he realized his love for war. Yep. If you notice, he was never a prime minister for peace. Hence, he lost the election after the war, because he didn't know how to tackle peace. But how did he regain the prime ministership a few years after was mainly by calling Russia the nation that was going to get us into a Cold War.
Yeah.
So going anti-fascism and being a warrior really was something that spurred him on.
It's something that helped deeply, though, because there's a big school of thought from what I've read out there that Churchill was a warmonger. He loved war, as you said, and he wanted war. But from my readings, it's more so that because he'd been in so much of it, he understood it from a point of view that no other politician could come. He was the first politician, both publicly and privately, to be aware and understand of what was coming with Hitler, because he'd seen it fighting on the Pakistani border with the Muslim extremists. He'd seen the same traits. He was the first British politician to publicly and privately sympathise and empathise with the German Jews for knowing what was going on. So in that way, and people construed that, rightly or wrongly, to say this guy wants war. Did he want war, or was he just have an understanding of what was coming, whether he liked it or not? So
he understood nations.
So it could come from a point of view. And that's, as I said, we look at the people who are leading us now. Have they ever been through anything? Are they leading from any sort of experience?
That's right.
And that's what fascinated me with this guy. How was he able to? Because Britain nearly lost the war. If Germany didn't attack Russia and then declare war on the USA, Britain were losing the war. But he somehow managed to keep that whole country believing they were winning the war.
Yep.
And that is a skill. We talk about what some of our leaders did when COVID happened and went to water, and what our staff saw, and what were we going in there as if everything was okay and reassuring people, or where we scaring the shit out of them.
But he started by preaching the negative. So I think long before the Americans got involved, he actually said to the population, much sweat is going to be wasted, much oil spent. There's going to be a lot of people killed. He actually said these things. And one of the things I really liked it is when he was in private, he actually cried to one of his general, apparently, saying, you know, I can't believe all of these people believe me. And yet they don't know how much blood is going to come from them following me. And I personally think he was a man of action. He loved action. Wherever there was no action, he would find a way of instigating it. So even when he lost the prime ministership after the war, it took him a little while of painting before he started going on tour with Truman in America, because by that time Roosevelt had died, so Truman had taken over. And twice, actually, he used the Americans as a social media of the time, if you will.
Reignite his popularity.
Yes. And it was an amazing thing. He said, this guy, when you read his quote, never, 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 never give up. That man is truly the epitome of that. Yep. Never give up.
It's the unshakable belief.
So during the Second Boer War and a few other wars, he was a war correspondent to a lot of the papers, and that's why he wrote so many articles and the books that he wrote on war. He became very skilled at writing and public speaking. And that, I think, as you said, was an accumulation of reading his father's articles, and all the practice that he had was reporting on the war.
He's famous for his memory.
Right.
Yeah.
So, as you said, he came into politics when he was 25, and there was a 2-year period.
He lost his first election. He tried to get in 21 and lost.
So there was a 2-year period from when he first got into politics until he actually became Prime Minister. There's a 2-year period that he actually was not a politician. They call it the wandering years. And during that time, he was still writing letters to all the different ministers of all different areas, telling them what they should be doing. He became actually quite hated, despised by people in his own party because of putting his nose into their business where he wasn't wanted.
But he wasn't a man of his own party. Do you know that he started as a conservative?
Yeah, he changed.
And then
went to the liberal and then came back to the conservative.
He wore a few different jerseys, didn't he?
And he's the one who came up with the line, anyone can rat, but it takes a certain amount of ingenuity to re-rat.
to do it twice.
And during those times, that's when he was writing a lot. And as you said, he was the only person in all of England warning everyone of the Nazi militarization. And when it come to fruit, the war had been going for 8 months before he became Prime Minister. So when he stepped in and became Prime Minister, they were like, well, this guy foresaw all this. And he's gone from someone very hated, sticking his nose into everyone's business, into a position where he understood the common man. He was checking up on his different departments, making sure they're doing the right thing. So he went from someone who was hated in politics to a very successful Prime Minister with the war education.
He led by example. As Thomas said, he's a man of action. He landed in France 6 days after D-Day. Everyone told him he was mad. The rest of Parliament were trying to stop him, and he said, no way, no how. Going. They were actually, his closest people were laughing about it, saying good luck stopping him. I just think many, many, many lessons could be brought forward to 2021 and the way that we interact with our people and the way we lead. He's a real leader, yeah. Like,
he was very
not a perfect human.
No, absolutely not.
Not a perfect human, but a leader.
He was very go in there and get amongst the boys too. He was like, I want to be amongst the soldiers. I want to see them. I want to shake their hands. I want to see them. And he was shot at by enemy fire on one of his tours because he went so close to the border that the other guys wouldn't have been able to see who they're shooting at, but there was bullets whizzing past their head.
And self-made too. That's one of the things I love.
I wouldn't say self-made coming from aristocracy. I wouldn't say self-made.
Yeah, but his dad died at 42, gave him
But he
nothing.
still comes from privilege. In England, privilege counts for a lot. I mean, but he still did drive himself.
Didn't get to financial solvency till he was 53.
Well, there you go. Okay.
But here is another thing. He's quite polarizing figure.
Yes.
Gallipoli.
Yep.
Screwed it up big time.
Okay. It's fault. How many hundreds of
lives,
thousands?
Absolutely.
Yeah? So how do you look at that? Let's say we here live in Australia. In terms of his decision, even though I get it, if it wasn't for his big decision, we might be speaking German right now.
Well, and that's it. We said before when we were reading the Stoic, we said your defeats teach you something for the future.
Yeah.
And because he maybe lost those and made those wrong decisions in Gallipoli, suited him well then to take advice properly in World War II.
He had a quote along those lines. I'm going to paraphrase because I didn't write it down, but it's, should I have done nothing less for making all those failures, or something very similar to that. So he knew he'd fucked up a lot.
Yeah.
He knew he'd made lots of mistakes.
And he wore it.
He thought, should he die having done nothing or having made
he was a salesman, mate. He said if it wasn't for that action, maybe there would have been 2 or 3 million dead. It's not bad, right? 250,000 and whatever.
No, everyone makes mistakes, and I suppose
it's only 250,000 lives.
No, but that's what I mean. And everyone's up Dan Andrews now for 800 people dying in the nursing homes in Victoria. So I guess we've all got to check ourselves when we're throwing so much candy, but then we're talking about one of the great leaders of all time who led 300,000 people to their deaths. So, but does less of a man have that failure, have that massive failure, and top himself, or never go into hiding, or because I know if I'd sent 300,000 people to die in a fuck up, I don't know if I'd be running for Prime Minister 15 years later.
That's true.
Here's another thing. We're studying the Stoics. I mean, and this is a question I ask a lot of people quite often, and I even asked Matthew earlier. How do you know you're leading a good life, or you're living a good life? Let's have a look now, just for a second. Is he a good man? Is he a great man? And how do we define it? Because looking at his family, he had a son who amounted to not much. He was the Queen actually wanted to give him a title that I think the Parliament or people around the Queen objected, because upon his death, his son was going to take it over, and then they didn't want his son to have that title. He had, I think, a daughter who committed suicide. He had a daughter who died at the age of 2, so I can't really use that. One actually was quite balanced. So how can such a great man is that success? Be investing everything in one field, and then having his private life and his children not being looked after?
I'm calling great leader in tough times, not great human.
No, I'm asking now. So
that comes down to what we speak about. One of our life qualities is balanced life.
Right.
And I think to be in that situation and to be politically driven as he was, I don't think you can have a balanced life. And I think back in those times, there was a different sense of family than there is today.
So
our understanding of family today is completely different to what it was back then. For men specifically, they were go provide and go do whatever you need to do and so forth.
So did then, going back to, again, the Stoic, the greed and ambition that we talked about. Here's a bloke who said at 16 he was going to save the world. Prophetically or woo-woo, wah-wah, however you want to say it, that's what he said.
It affected his family life, yes.
That ambition or that unshakable belief that I am going to save Great Britain one day, it was going to have consequences, wasn't it?
And you can look at it this way. He could have a great family life and we could all be speaking German, like you said before, right? So
what do you say? What's your opinion?
I don't know. For me, you know my opinion. I think that for me, a human being must stand on every door that he opens. If you open up a door called family door, well, you have responsibility. If you only open the door of your destiny at the age of 16 and that's all you want, then just do that. But I think that if you open doors and you're not living up to those responsibility that you have open, then I don't know. I can't really gauge you as a great man, right? I can gauge you, yes, as a man who managed to get the Americans and the Soviet to be at the same table, even though I think the American to the table was pure luck, that if Japan hadn't stuffed up with Pearl Harbor, I don't know where America would have been in, right? Because he had tried for quite a few years. Yeah. So, okay, you may say that history is also made of luck or stuff up. In that case, I probably would say stuff up. But when we're talking about human beings and the quality of a man, I like to look at everything. I think I like to look at your balance sheet. It is not enough for you to tell me that you're doing great in sales. I also want to have a look at your assets, whether you're not spending too much, whether you're not having a profit and loss that is so skewed that it doesn't matter how much profit you bring in, you are going to be at loss overall. I think that's the overall picture of a human being I like to see.
I think it's hard to know without being there. But from what I have been able to gather, he made no secret of the fact that he was a lucky bastard in that so many things fell his way. Like as I read out before, he should have been dead 100 times over. But and even to the war, I mean, the quote I've got from the book was his greatest duty was to prevent the British people from realising they were losing the war, and no one was better at it than him. And he managed to keep them with a level of hope and unity until he got saved by Germany attacking Russia, and then by them declaring war on the US. The thing is here, if Britain had fallen in 1940, America wouldn't have been able to join the war because the Germans and the Italian army and the British navies would have pounded the shit out of the eastern seaboard of America. If they had tried to go to war, they wouldn't have been able to do it. So his luck or fortune or keeping England going just long enough for Hitler to fuck up and attack Russia pretty much saved the world, because if America doesn't come into the war, there's no winning the war.
Yeah.
And I think he had an undeniable belief that, that luck happened because I've known since I was a child I was going to save the world, so nothing's going to happen to me. But I don't think he had an ego about it. I think he had a humility where he went on,
I think that for our salespeople, there's always a lesson. To me, the lesson is that every man and woman has got defining moments. Maybe not one, maybe sometime many defining moments. And I hope that salespeople really and leaders actually take those defining moments and are willing to grab the bull by the horn and go for it. But, it's very, very hard for England, having escaped now their annihilation by the German Nazi, to say, all right, we all in, and let me go and negotiate, with the Soviets. And I think that if we were just to look at our life and the world of selling, all we need to look at is always be ready for fight, always be ready to grab opportunities and run with it. Don't wait until things are perfect.
Yep.
And secondly, I think what I like about what he's done is that he wanted a better place. He wanted a better world. And all of his actions were there.
Looking into this, I know until Cameron said Winston Churchill, I never really looked into the guy except for watching the movie years and years ago.
I thought everyone knew who he was, but I've spoken to a few under 30s this week who had no idea.
I'll tell you something I was surprised with, which really hit home for me. There's two sayings that he had, which I really, wow. One was about fear. Fear is a reaction, courage is a decision. And I thought that was amazing. But the last one apparently was the last words on his deathbed. Just before he passed away, he said, I am born with it all. So everything you need, you're born with. And I thought that, for me, was amazing, that we all strive and achieve and want to go for more, for greatness. And he's saying that everything he needed, he was born with. And he was one of the most prominent political figures in history.
It ties back into what we were talking about.
The Stoics, exactly right.
Understand what you've got at your disposal.
And that I thought that was such a great saying.
What about the myth? What about the fake news about Fleming and him?
That I don't know.
No?
Fill me in.
If you go on the net, there's tons and tons of stories about how the son of a very wealthy man was drowning. A farmer's boy saved him, and the father of the son actually sent his son for an education, and that person ended up creating the penicillin, who actually cured the prime minister. And the prime minister turned out to be, many years later, the son of that man who sent Alexander Fleming to medical school. Look at it.
I didn't come across that bit.
And you will see so many of those stories.
Right.
And it's just a story that even Alexander Fleming was writing about and laugh about it. So I laughed about it because I thought, hold on, we're talking about fake news now, and it's going to be the next thing that we're talking about. But, mate, even back in those days, the myths and the story and the fake news, they're crazy, aren't they?
Hasn't that gone on since day dot, though?
The turn of the century, mate. But
the turn of civilization.
The beginning of civilization. That's exactly right.
The story of people.
Call it propaganda.
The stories you hear about.
Call it,
absolutely. I heard he killed 3 dragons with one. Oh, it's just the aura of someone. Like
with a lightning bolt from his ass. What did William Wallace say?
and somehow, some way, the aura of Winston Churchill has evolved into creating penicillin. So good on him. But it's interesting, isn't it? But to
I'm,
have that
I'm,
effect,
I'm just impressed that he could jump off a 30. How high was the bridge?
30 foot,
30-foot bridge and survived.
only just. But
Only
I
just
think,
survived.
I think the bigger lessons, like all those lessons you said, TL, are massive, and people need to use those as defining moments and take them and run. But how we react under pressure and under conflict and when things aren't going well, like for leaders out there, I mean, for everyone in their individual life. But that was the biggest lesson I got, especially when COVID first happened. We were basically at war with this invisible pandemic and with what the governments were doing to us and all that stuff. So I started looking for wartime leaders, and
that's fair enough.
He had England convinced that they were winning that war, even though they were getting their ass kicked, for just long enough for them to win the war. And how many of us did that in our offices, and how many of us do that in our life? How many of us walk in front of our kids, in front of our partners, in front of our team, in front of whatever, and have the solution focus and the mindset that, no, we're going to win this thing.
Well said, mate.
And that, I think, was most relevant over the last 12 months.
Well done, man. Thanks, boys.
Good choice,
Talk
mate.
soon.
See you, boys.
All right, bye.
Wine wins.